The wind came off the mesa dry as old bone, carrying the smell of creosote and horse sweat, and the faint iron tang of a well pump 300 yards off. And the old ranch house sat at the end of the wagon road like a promise nobody wanted to keep. It was late September. The cottonwoods along the creek had begun to yellow at the tips. A kettle on the stove inside the kitchen breathed steam against the window glass, and beyond the glass the yard was empty, and the sky was the kind of hard blue that means weather is coming and will take its time. Her name was Ren Halloway. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not rich, not poor. The kind of governess a household kept because she was quiet and did not break things, and taught the children their letters without asking to be praised for it. She was 25. She had come out from the coast 3 winters ago with one trunk and a Bible, with her mother's name inked on the flyleaf, and she had stayed, because there was nowhere else, and because the children needed her, and because the old man who owned the ranch had told her once that a person could be useful here without being seen, and she had understood that as a gift. She stood at the kitchen window with her hands red from the wash water and a strip of muslin between her fingers, and she watched the road. The road was empty. It had been empty for 2 days. But something in her had been counting the empty since Monday, and this morning the counting had grown loud. The old Duke's ranch, they called it, though the Duke had not set foot on it in 11 years. He owned it from 3,000 miles away, from a country of gray stone and colder rain, and he sent letters and instructions, and twice a year money for the well and the wire and the winter hay. His name in this county was a rumor, a shape people made with their mouths when they wanted to sound like they knew a thing. Ren had never seen him. She thought of him, when she thought of him, as an old, grave voice in ink. The children were asleep upstairs, 2 of them, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6, orphaned in the spring by a fever that had taken their mother and father inside a week, taken in by the old Duke's foreman because there was no one else, and given into Ren's keeping because the foreman had a bad back and a soft heart, and no patience for grief that small. She had washed them and fed them, and taught the girl her alphabet with a stick in the dust. She had promised the boy she would not leave. She had learned, in 3 years on this ranch, not to weep where it showed. The bridge over the creek was going to fail before the first snow. She had told the foreman. She had told the smith. She had told the man who brought the mail, who only laughed. She kept telling, because keeping the telling was the only power she had. She dried her hands on her apron. She went to the door. She opened it. There was a man on a bay horse at the far end of the wagon road, sitting very still, watching the house. He was too far off for a face. He was near enough for a rifle scabbard along his knee. She did not move for a long moment. She counted the seconds by the pop of the kettle. Then she closed the door quietly, as if closing it loudly might reach him, and she went up the stairs on the balls of her feet and stood at the children's door and listened to them breathe. If you're finding your way into this story, please subscribe to the channel so more like it can come to you. She woke the boy first because the boy could be told and would not cry. She said his name once. She said, "We are going to the Ruth." He looked at her with the flat, old eyes he had brought back from the fever week, and he did not ask why. He got out of the bed and put on his boots. The girl she carried, the girl still warm and unwoken, into the crook of her arm, with the child's face against her collar, so the child would not see the window. She did not run. Running on stairs makes noise. She went down the back way, past the pantry, past the door to the root cellar she had considered and refused, because a cellar is a hole, and a hole is where you die. The ladder to the roof was on the north side of the house behind the kitchen chimney, put there by some long-dead builder for the patching of shingles, and it was the one high place on the whole property that could not be seen from the road. She set the girl on the shingles first. The shingles were warm from the morning sun. She lifted the boy up after and told him to lie flat behind the chimney and to keep his hand on his sister's back and to say nothing, nothing at all, no matter what he heard. He nodded. He did not ask. He put his small hand on the sleeping child's back, and he lay down. Then Ren went back down the ladder because she had left the kettle on the stove, and a kettle boiling dry sends up a smell a man can read from the road. And she took it off the fire, and she set it in the sink. And she stood a moment in the kitchen, with her hands flat on the table, and she made her hands stop shaking. They stopped. She had learned that, too. She was climbing back up the ladder when she heard the horses. Not one horse. She counted by the sound. 6, 7. 7 horses coming up the wagon road at the walk, unhurried, the way men come when they know the house has no one in it who can answer them. She got to the roof, and she lay flat behind the chimney with the children between her and the brick, and she looked down through the gap where the shingles met the flashing, and she watched 7 men ride into the yard of the old Duke's ranch. They were not lawmen. Lawmen ride in a line. These rode in a loose fan, the way wolves come to a carcass. Their leader was a big man in a black coat with a silver band on his hat, and he sat his horse the way a man sits who has taken other men's houses before and did not expect this one to be different. Behind him rode 5 with rifles across their saddles, and one at the back who rode a little apart, on a gray horse, in a plain coat the color of dust, with no rifle showing, and a face she could not see under the brim of his hat. The big man swung down. He walked to the door of the house as if he owned it. He knocked once, courteously, and then he tried the latch, and then he stepped back and said something over his shoulder that she could not hear. And 2 of the riflemen swung down and walked to the barn, and one walked to the well, and one walked to the bunkhouse, and the 6th stayed mounted with his rifle across his thighs and watched the yard. The 7th, the man on the gray horse, did not dismount. He sat his horse in the middle of the yard, and he looked, slowly, at everything. He looked at the barn. He looked at the well. He looked at the pump. He looked at the wagon road behind him. He looked at the house. He looked at the roof. Ren did not move. Her hand on the boy's back did not move. Her breath went very small. He looked away. The big man came out of the house shaking his head. He said something that made 2 of the others laugh. He walked to the well and pulled up the bucket and drank from it, and spat, and said something else. And then he walked back to his horse and did not mount it, but stood beside it with a hand on the pommel, like a man waiting for the day to arrange itself around him. Ren understood then what she had not let herself understand at the kitchen window. These men had come to take the ranch, not to rob it. to take it. There was a difference, and the difference was that robbers leave and takers stay, and if they stayed, the children would not survive the staying, because children on a ranch that has changed hands by rifle do not survive it. They are inconvenient. They are witnesses. They are mouths. She had known at the window that they were coming for a thing. She had thought the thing was cattle, or the strong box in the foreman's desk, or the horses in the near pasture. She saw now that the thing was the ground itself. The old Duke's land ran from the creek to the low mesa, 4 sections of good grass and a spring that never failed, and there had been a man in the county for 2 years, a man in a black coat with a silver band on his hat, who had made offers by letter and been refused by letter, and had sent a lawyer and had sent a second lawyer, and had at last, apparently, sent 7 men. She thought of the foreman who had ridden out Sunday to bring back the last of the strays, and was not due until Thursday. She thought of the smith who was 3 miles off and old. She thought of the road to town, which was 11 miles and open. She thought of the rifle in the foreman's office, which was loaded, which she could shoot, which she would not reach without crossing the yard. She thought of the 2 children breathing under her hand. She did not pray. She had stopped praying in the fever week. She only lay on the warm shingles behind the chimney, and she watched, and she made her hands be still, and she waited to see which of the 7 men would look up next. It was the 7th who looked up, the man on the gray horse. He had not moved from the middle of the yard. He had taken his hat off now and was turning it in his hands, slowly, and he was looking at the roof of the house the way a man looks at a thing he has been told about and is checking against what he had imagined. His face under the hat was not a young face, and not an old one. Hard bones, a nose that had been broken once and set by someone who was in a hurry. Gray eyes, or eyes the color of the shingles, she could not tell from where she lay. He looked at the chimney. He looked at the flashing. He looked at the gap where she was watching him through. He did not react. He put the hat back on. He turned the gray horse. He rode at the walk over to the big man in the black coat, and he said something quiet, and the big man laughed and clapped him on the shoulder and shook his head, and the 7th man shrugged as if it were nothing, and rode on past, out toward the barn, at the same unhurried walk. She did not know then that the man on the gray horse had crossed an ocean and a continent to be standing in that yard, that he had disembarked at the coast 6 weeks ago under a name that was not his, that he had ridden the last 300 miles alone and been overtaken on the road 2 days back by 6 men in a hurry to reach his own ranch before he did, and had fallen in with them as a 7th gun for hire, because it was the only way to arrive without a bullet in his back. She did not know that the old Duke in the country of gray stone had died in the spring, and that the letters signed with the old grave name for the last 4 months had been signed by the son, and that the son was the man on the gray horse in her yard, and that he had come to see with his own eyes what he had inherited and who was on it, and had meant to come quietly, and had been forced by circumstance to come quieter still. She did not know he had seen her at the kitchen window before she had seen him on the road, and had turned his horse there deliberately, so she would have the count of him, and had ridden slow the last mile to give her the time. She only knew that a man on a grey horse had looked at the roof and had not spoken of it, and that the count of the men in the yard was now 6, because the 7th had ridden off toward the barn where the 2 riflemen were, and that whatever was going to happen next was going to happen because of what that 7th man chose to do or not to do. The big man in the black coat set his men to the yard. 2 took the barn, 1 took the bunkhouse, 1 took the pump, 1 rode the fence line at a walk. The big man himself went back into the house, and she heard him faintly opening drawers. She lay on the roof with the children, and she listened to the drawers. Time went strange. The sun climbed. The shingles grew hot. The girl woke against her collar, and Ren pressed her cheek to the child's hair and breathed the one word, "Hush," into her ear. And the girl, who had learned in the fever week what hush meant, went still. The boy did not move his hand from his sister's back. He watched the yard through the gap in the flashing beside Ren, and his face was the face of a child who had already understood that the world could take his people, and had decided he would not make a sound about it. At the barn, out of the big man's sight, the 7th man was talking to the 2 riflemen. She could not hear the words. She saw one of the riflemen laugh and shake his head. She saw the 7th man dismount and walk into the barn with them. She saw, a long minute later, only the 7th man walk out. He was leading the 2 riflemen's horses by the reins. He tied them to the corral post very quietly. He did not look at the house. He walked to the bunkhouse. He did not go in armed. He went in the way a man goes in who has an errand, hat in hand, and the rifleman inside must have taken him for one of the crew, because there was no shout, and a minute later the 7th man walked out again alone, and closed the door behind him, and set a piece of hitching rail through the latch, quietly, and walked on. He walked to the well. The man at the well was drinking. The 7th man said something. The man at the well turned to answer, and the 7th man hit him, once, low in the belly, and caught him as he went down, and laid him against the well stones with a care that was almost tender, and took the rifle, and walked on. 4, Ren counted. 4 left. And then the man on the fence line rode back into the yard, and the count was 5, because the fence line man had not been touched, and the big man was still inside the house. The 7th man walked into the middle of the yard, in plain sight, with the well man's rifle across his forearm, the way a man carries a rifle who does not mean to raise it. He stopped 10 paces from the fence line rider. He said something. The rider's rifle came up. The 7th man had already fired. The shot cracked once against the mesa, and came back once, and was gone. The fence line rider slid sideways off his horse, and the horse shied and ran 3 steps and stopped, trembling, at the edge of the yard. The 7th man did not look at the fallen rider. He was already turned toward the house door, and the big man in the black coat was already coming through it, with a pistol in his hand, and the 7th man said, plainly, loud enough for the roof to hear, "You will not." The big man stopped. Ren, on the roof, understood the 2 words as a whole sermon. You will not. Not you shall not shoot me. Not you shall not fire. You will not. It was the voice of a man telling a fact. The big man looked at the seventh man. He looked at the yard. He counted as she had counted. He saw the tied horses and the barred bunkhouse, and the man at the well, and the man in the dust. He put the pistol down, slowly, on the porch step, and he raised his hands, the way a man raises his hands who has done this before on the other side of it. The seventh man walked to the porch and picked up the pistol and put it in his own belt. He said, "Quiet now. Sit." The big man sat on the porch step. The seventh man said, "Do not move your hands." The big man did not move his hands. Then the seventh man turned, at last, and looked up at the roof. "Come down," he said. He did not raise his voice. It carried the way a bell carries. It is safe now. The children, too. Ren did not come down at once. She lay on the warm shingles a long moment, with her hand on the girl's back and the boy's eyes on her face, and she made her breath even, and she made her hands still, and she considered the man in the yard. He had killed one man in front of her, and dropped 3 others, and taken a 4th without firing, and he had done it in the time it takes a kettle to cool, and he had known she was on the roof from the moment he rode into the yard, and he had not spoken of it, and he had cleared the yard first before he called her down. A man who meant them harm would have called her down first and cleared the yard around her. She stood up. She lifted the girl down through the trap and handed her to the boy at the top of the ladder and climbed down after them. And the 3 of them came out of the back door into the yard, hand in hand. She did not carry the children now. She walked them, the boy on her left, the girl on her right. Her hands were bare. Her sleeves were pushed to the elbow from the wash. Her hair had come down on one side, and she did not put it up. The 7th man had taken his hat off again. He was standing in the middle of the yard with the sun on his face. Gray eyes, she saw now, tired ones. He looked at the children first, one and then the other, and something in his face moved that she could not read. Then he looked at her. "You are the governess," he said. "I am," she said. "The foreman," he said. "When does he return?" "Thursday," she said, "if the strays are found." He nodded. He said, "There will be men from town by nightfall. I have sent for them." He gestured at the big man on the porch step without looking at him. "This one, and what is left of his crew, will be waiting for them, tied, in the bunkhouse. You and the children will not be here for that. You will be at the Smiths until morning. I will send for you when it is safe to come back." She looked at him. She said, "And who are you to send for me?" He looked away. He looked at the road. He looked at the mesa. He put the hat back on. He said, "A man who was told there was a governess and 2 children on this ranch, and rode ahead of these 6 to see it were true. My name will keep until the Smiths." He turned to the big man on the porch and said, "Get up." And the big man got up, and the 7th man walked him toward the bunkhouse without another word to her. She stood in the yard with the 2 children and watched him go. Her hands at her sides were shaking. She let them shake. There was no one watching now who mattered, and she was tired of not shaking. The girl put her small hot hand into Ren's and squeezed. She took the children to the kitchen. She put the kettle back on. She washed their faces. She fed them bread and butter and the last of the plum preserves, because the day had earned plum preserves. The boy ate without speaking. The girl ate and then leaned against Ren's arm and cried, quietly, into the muslin at Ren's wrist. And Ren let her cry, and did not shush her, because the crying was late and small and owed. When they had eaten, Ren wrote a note for the foreman and pinned it to the kitchen door. She did not write what had happened. She wrote only, "At the Smiths with the children, back tomorrow, all well." She packed a small bundle. She put out the fire in the stove. She took the children by the hand and walked them out of the yard, past the porch where the big man had sat, past the corral where the tied horses stood quiet now, out the wagon road toward the Smiths 3 miles away, and she did not look back at the house, or the barn, or the bunkhouse, or at the man on the gray horse who was standing in the yard watching them go with his hat in his hand. She heard once from the porch a sound she thought might have been him saying something. She did not turn. She walked on. The smith met them at his gate with his old dog at his knee and his old rifle across his arm, and he did not ask questions when he saw her face, only opened the gate and took the girl up onto his own hip as if she weighed nothing and said, "Kettle's on," and led them into his kitchen. His wife wrapped Ren in a shawl and put a cup in her hands and sat with her without speaking. Ren drank the tea. Her hands around the cup went still at last. 2 hours later, 3 riders came up the road from town at the gallop, hard-eyed men with a badge among them, and turned into the ranch road without stopping. And an hour after that, 4 more, and then a wagon, and the smith stood at his gate and watched them pass, and came back into the kitchen and said, "Quiet. Whatever happened up there, it is being finished properly." He did not ask what. That night, Ren slept on a cot in the smith's back room, with the children curled against her on either side, and she did not dream. And she woke once in the dark to the sound of a horse walking past on the road, slow, going up toward the ranch, and she knew without seeing that it was the gray horse. And she knew, without knowing how, that the man on it had ridden past deliberately at that hour, so she would hear it and know he had not left. In the morning, a boy came from the ranch on the smith's own pony with a folded paper for her. She opened it at the kitchen table with the smith's wife pretending not to watch. The hand was plain. It said only, "The yard is clean, the foreman is back, the children may come home, and there is a man here who would like to speak to you, when you are ready and not before." It was not signed. She folded it. She put it in her apron pocket. She said to the smith's wife, "We will go back after breakfast." And the smith's wife nodded and cut more bread. They walked back up the wagon road at mid-morning with the September sun on their shoulders and the cottonwoods along the creek yellower than they had been the day before. The boy walked ahead, kicking a stone. The girl held Ren's hand and sang, tunelessly, a small private song. The road was quiet. There were fresh wheel tracks and many hoof prints. There was no one on the road behind them, and no one on the road ahead. The foreman met them at the gate of the yard. His face was gray. He took Ren's hand in both of his and did not let go for a long moment and said, "I heard." and shook his head and said, "Girl," and then said nothing else, because he was not a man who had words for these things. He knelt down and hugged the boy, and picked the girl up and carried her toward the house, and Ren followed, and the yard was clean, as the note had said. The bodies were gone, the horses were gone, the porch step had been washed, someone had swept. The man on the gray horse was sitting on the porch bench, with his hat on his knee and his coat undone, and his hands loose between his knees. And he stood up when he saw her coming, and he stood a long moment without saying anything, and then he said, "Miss Halloway." "I do not remember telling you my name," she said. "No," he said, "you did not." The foreman took the children into the kitchen with a hand on each of their heads, and did not look back, and Ren and the man on the gray horse were alone in the yard. He said, "Will you sit?" She said, "I will stand." He nodded. He did not argue. He said, "My name is not one I have used with you yet. I would like to give it to you now, if you will hear it." "Give it," she said. He said it. It was a plain name. It was also the name at the bottom of 11 years of letters. She had folded those letters herself, twice a year, and put them in the tin in the foreman's desk, and she had never seen the man who wrote them, and she had thought of him as an old grave voice in ink, and she had been wrong by a generation, and by an ocean, and by a continent, and she stood in the yard with her hands at her sides, and her hair down on one side from the walk, and she looked at him. "You are the Duke," she said. "I am," he said, "since the spring. My father died in April. I did not write it in the letters because I did not want the ranch told before I could come and see it. I came to see it. I came alone because I did not want to be met at the coast and shown a face of the place that was not its face. 2 days out from town, I was overtaken by 6 men who were riding hard for this ranch. I understood, from listening, what they meant to do. I could ride on ahead and be shot in the back on this road, or I could ride in with them as a 7th gun and arrive alive. I chose the second thing. I meant to disarm them at the wagon road turn. I did not know until I saw you at the kitchen window that there was a governess on the place and 2 children. I turned the gray horse there deliberately so you would have the count of me and the time to move. I rode slow the last mile to give you the time. I saw you go up the ladder. I did not speak of it in the yard. "Why?" she said. "Because a man who wants to know a place," he said, "watches what the woman on it does when she believes no one of rank can see her." You did not scream. You did not run out the front door. You did not open the strong box and try to buy them. You took 2 children who are not yours to a place they could not be seen from the road, and you went back down for the kettle, so the smell of it burning would not tell them the house was tended. And you climbed back up, and you lay still. I watched you make your hands stop shaking on the kitchen table. I saw. I have inherited a great deal of ground, and a great deal of stock, and a great deal of ledger, and I did not know a single thing about any of it until I stood in that yard, and watched a governess I had never heard of choose those 2 children over her own breath. I know one thing about this ranch now. I know who has been on it. She did not answer that. She did not know how to. She looked at her hands. They were steady. He said, "I owe you an apology. I have kept a name from you for a day and a night, and it was necessary, and it was still a lie. I would like you to say, if you can, that you understand why, and if you cannot say it today, I will wait." "I understand why," she said. "Thank you," he said. There was a silence. A rook called once from the cottonwoods along the creek. The kettle in the kitchen began, faintly, to sing. He said, "There is another thing. I do not want to say it standing in a yard. Will you walk with me as far as the bridge?" "The bridge," she said. "The bridge over the creek," he said. "I looked at it this morning. You are right about it. It will not last the snow. I have already sent for the timber. I mention it because the foreman told me, when I asked him what you had been at these 3 years, that you had been telling anyone who would listen about that bridge, and no one had listened. I would like to say, on the walk, that I have listened. I would like to say some other things also on the walk. I am not going to say them in a yard where a child could come out a door." She looked at him. She said, "I will walk to the bridge." They walked. He did not offer his arm. He walked a half-step behind her, the way a man walks who has been taught not to crowd. At the bridge they stopped and looked down at the water, low and clear over the round stones, and he spoke quietly for a long time. He spoke of his father, who had never come back to this country, and had been sorry for it at the end. He spoke of a woman he had almost married 8 years ago, who had wept prettily in drawing rooms, and had struck a housemaid across the face at a house party for spilling wine, and how he had ended it the next morning, and had not, since, trusted a woman's tears in public, or a woman's laugh at a servant. He spoke of the 6 weeks of riding alone across a country he did not know, and of how the ranch, when he finally saw it from the ridge above the wagon road, had looked smaller than the drawings, and truer than the drawings, and how the kitchen window, with a woman in it, doing wash, had been the first honest thing he had seen since the coast. He said, "I am not going to ask you for anything today. I am going to say a thing, and then I am going to leave you at this bridge and walk back to the house alone. And you may come back when you please, or not come back today at all if you would rather stay another night at the Smiths. I would like you, in your own time, to consider whether you would let me court you, not as the Duke, as the man who rode in yesterday. If your answer is no, I will hear it without argument, and I will not raise it again. And your place on this ranch is yours for as long as you want it, regardless. I would rather have your no, freely given, than your yes because you felt you must. I will not press you. I will not write. I will wait until you speak." She looked at the water. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Thank you." They stood a moment longer. Then he touched the brim of his hat and turned, and walked back up the wagon road toward the house. And she stayed on the bridge and watched the water, and did not weep, and her hands on the rail were steady. She came back to the house at dusk. She did not give him an answer that night. She did not give him an answer that week. He did not ask. He rode out with the foreman in the mornings, and learned the fence lines, and the water, and the stock. And he came in at supper, and sat at the far end of the table, and spoke to the children first, and to her last, and always plainly, and never once in a way that pressed. The timber came for the bridge on the Friday. He worked on the bridge himself, in shirt sleeves, with the smith and the foreman, and he came in at dark with his hands raw and did not mention his hands. In the second week she found, folded inside a ledger the foreman handed her, a receipt for 3 years of a doctor's visits to the smith's wife, who had been ill in the winters, paid quarterly from the old duke's accounts under the notation, "Private, name not to be given." She took it to the foreman. The foreman looked at it a long time and said, "That will have been the old man." And then he looked at her face and said, "Or it will have been the young one before he came, since the spring. Ask him." She did not ask him. She put the receipt back in the ledger. She began, after that, to notice other quiet lines in other ledgers. A schooling in town for a stable boy she had thought fatherless. A widow's rent 3 counties over. A pair of boots left at a bunkhouse door with no note. Every entry the same notation. Name not to be given. She asked the housekeeper, who had come out from the coast with the new duke, and who was a dry, small woman with warm hands, whether the young master had done any of it. The housekeeper looked at her over the rim of a teacup and said, "My dear, he asked me the day he arrived not to say who sent any of it, and I gave him my word, and I am telling you now only because he did not say I could not tell someone who had already guessed." And she drank her tea. Ren went out that evening to the bridge. He was there, alone, checking the new timbers with his hand. She stood at the near end of the bridge and said his name. He looked up. It was the first time she had said it. She said, "I have considered." He put down the tool in his hand. He did not step toward her. He said, "And?" She said, "Yes, if you will be spoken to, always, and never lied to again, even for a good reason. If you will not send for a doctor for the smith's wife, without telling me you have done it, so that I may thank you privately for her, since she cannot thank you at all. If you will let me keep every piece of myself, including the piece that will always be a governess in a kitchen, then yes." He said, "Yes, to all of it." She said, "Then yes." He crossed the bridge to her, slowly, and he took her right hand in both of his, and he drew off the mending glove she had forgotten she was wearing, finger by finger, and he laid the glove on the rail of the bridge, and he lifted her bare hand and kissed the knuckles once, gravely, and he laced his fingers through hers, and he held them. And a rook called once from the cottonwoods, and neither of them said anything else for a long moment, because it was the only word she had needed, and she had spoken it, and there was nothing left to add out loud. They were married in the small church in town 3 weeks later, on a bright, cold morning, and the ranch was there, and the smith and his wife were there, and the foreman gave her away with tears he did not bother to hide, and the housekeeper cried into a plain handkerchief, and the 2 children carried a basket of late roses between them down the aisle, and the wedding was a duke's wedding only in the sentence that names it so, and otherwise it was a country wedding, and no one wept who did not want to. A year later, in a September that came in dry and gold as the last one had, she stood at the same kitchen window with the mending in her hands, and watched him ride in from the pasture on the gray horse with the boy up behind him and the girl on the pommel, and she thought, without ornament, that this was the shape her life had taken, and that it was a good shape. The new bridge over the creek had held its first winter, and would hold the next. The big man in the black coat had been tried in the county seat, and sent away for a long time, and his lawyer had written one letter and been answered once, and had not written again. The 2 children were her children now, in a paper the county had drawn up, and both of them had signed at the bottom in careful ink. The stable boy was at school in town. The smith's wife had been well through the summer. The rook still called from the cottonwoods, and she still counted by it. That evening she sat with him by the fire in the front room, and the children were asleep upstairs. And he took her hand in his and drew off the glove she wore against the September chill, finger by finger, and laid it on the arm of the chair, and laced his fingers through her bare fingers, and they did not let go. Outside, the wagon road was empty and quiet, and above the mesa the hard blue sky was going soft with dusk, and somewhere down the creek the new bridge held the weight of a wagon coming home. A person, she thought, is only what she does when she believes no one of rank can see her, and a man is only what he does when he could keep quiet and does not. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel so more like it can find you, and stay with me a moment longer. I want to ask you something. When Ren was on the roof with those 2 children under her hand, she made a choice that no one was ever meant to see, and a stranger on a gray horse saw it anyway and understood it for what it was. So tell me, in the comments, which quiet thing she did on that roof told you first who she really was? The way she went back down for the kettle? The way she made her hands stop shaking on the kitchen table? Or the way she did not scream when the 7th man looked up? I read every answer. Rest easy tonight, and I will meet you here again soon, with another story of a woman the world tried not to see, and a man who saw her anyway.